to DTBY's community podcast hosted by the CYC. We are a movement dedicated to inspiring, mentoring, and building the leadership capabilities of tomorrow's leaders.
We recognize the power of community as a key component for thriving and wellness. So we create this podcast to highlight and spread awareness about organizations we believe uplift the community.
Through sharing a diverse range of local leaders' stories and passions, we hope to promote inclusivity and inspire others to get involved within their community.
As always, before we introduce this month's guest, we'd first like to offer a land acknowledgement.
Although this gathering is virtual, we recognize that DTBY convenes on the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of many nations, including the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat peoples, and is also home now to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people.
At DTBY's charity, we are proud to promote the spirit of helping, sharing, and caring for our neighbors without the expectation that has been exemplified by each of these nations as the first peoples of this land for thousands of years. And we wish to acknowledge our gratitude for the ongoing opportunity to live, work, and build community on this land.
We all have a collective responsibility to take care of ourselves and these lands, and it's past time to turn reflection into action. And we challenge ourselves and everyone here joining us today to commit to at least one tangible next step to move this work forward.
Welcome back to our third episode of DTBY's community podcast hosted by the CYC. My name is Cassia, and I will be the host for this episode alongside my fellow CYC member, Rachel. Today, on behalf of DTBY and the CYC, it is our pleasure to welcome Fayrouz from ROCK Halton. ROCK is an acronym for Reach Out Center for Kids and is an accredited multi-service organization and the lead agency for Halton's child and youth mental health sector. Thank you for joining us today, Fayrouz. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Great job describing ROCK. I feel like you covered most of kind of my intro pieces there. So yes, my name is Fayrouz. My pronouns are she and her, and I work at ROCK.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself, Fayrouz. So I guess we will begin with our first question. So if you wouldn't mind explaining, what is ROCK for those who don't know, and what specific services do you offer?
Yeah, so like I said, you kind of, covered a couple of pieces that I wanted to go over there. One being the acronym. So ROCK does stand for Reach Out Center for Kids. We are a child and youth mental health agency in Halton, and we are the lead agency for the child and youth mental health sector. So that's a designation that we got from the Ministry of Child and Youth Services. We're funded by the ministry, and that allows us to offer a really wide range of different services, programs and services to the Halton community without any fees because we're publicly funded. So that means more equitable access to folks in our community, which is great. We have 3 main offices in Halton, so we are based out of Halton. Our head office is in Burlington. We have an office in Milton and one in Oakville. And then we also have a lot of other satellite locations all over Halton that we offer programming out of. And I will kind of go through some of the programming. I don't know if I'm going to get to all of them because we do offer a lot more than folks think we do. So our services actually range in supporting children and youth starting at age 0, so newborn, with the focus being on early years and infant mental health in that age range there, ranging all the way up to 17. So when youth turn 18, they then transition into the adult mental health sector. That being said, we do have a couple of programs actually that do support children and youth over 18, just a couple select programs if they're still in school. So we offer largely services like, what people would think of when they think of mental health supports and services like therapy and counseling and that kind of thing. That can look like, even within that realm of therapy and counseling, there's a lot. So that could even look like a single session of therapy. That can be for clients who maybe have like a very specific issue that they want to work through, or maybe they've never accessed therapy before. And so this can be a good way to sort of, get your feet wet and try it out and see if it's something that you can see yourself doing longer term. So that's usually the first step, honestly, for a lot of folks, is that single session through what we call like our virtual walk-in clinic, very similar to like a medical walk-in clinic kind of model. You are able to access it in your moment of need. You call in and you get an appointment kind of, whether it's same day or same week. And that's sort of like the entryway to a lot of our services. So that's, one aspect of what we do. But we also offer a whole lot more than that. So there's like group programs that we offer. We offer group services, not just for clients themselves, but even for their parents or caregivers. And that's really the great thing about services at ROCK, is how diverse they are. When people think of mental health services, they might just think that it is limited to therapy, but there's so much more that we offer outside of that. We support folks in the community with a wide range of needs. That could look like, again, like parent education, through group programs, and that's sort of like an opportunity for them to learn maybe like skills and strategies to be able to support their child or their youth with their mental health needs. That could even look like, I talked about the infant mental health piece. So we actually have in Burlington, the Early On Center, where we offer a lot of like drop-in programs for new moms, again, parent education, and parent support. We even offer peer support as well. So these are parents who have their own lived experience with supporting a child or youth with mental health. And so they're able to offer support to, parents with that understanding of having their own lived experience. We have prevention services. So this is, it falls under sort of like what we call our targeted prevention umbrella of services. So these are services for children or youth who might be at risk of developing mental health challenges in the future. That could be things like maybe they're having, just some self-esteem challenges, or maybe they're being bullied at school. And so offering something at that like early intervention stage is, we're able to kind of mitigate some of those risks and support them early on, which we hope, provides higher level of like successful outcomes, clinical outcomes. And that can look like, we even have like summer camp programs, again, like group programs with focus on like things like body image, like for children who maybe are struggling with their body image, or again, self-esteem building, learning how to make and maintain friendships, building on social skills, all, sorts of great preventative skills that they can learn. They are run out of like I said, all over Halton, right? So we have what we call our ROCK hub spaces. So these are sort of like community spaces where we are able to offer a lot of those programs and services. And then in those ROCK hub spaces, they even offer things like food support and specific programming for the communities that kind of live in that area. So lots of really great programs and services that support a really wide range of different needs for, varying needs in the community.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for all that detail that you went into. And I think it was incredible to hear even services I didn't know existed. So thank you so much for answering in so much detail. I will pass it on to Rachel for the next question.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say that's amazing. I had no idea that ROCK had all those services. That's incredible. And our second question is, how long have you been involved with ROCK, and what is your current role?
Yeah, so I have actually, believe it or not, been at ROCK for coming up on 12 years now. So I've been here for a long time. This is like my first job in the field. Like I started out actually doing my field practicum at ROCK. Completed that and then got hired on and have stayed since then. So my role has changed throughout my time here. So currently I am my official title is I'm a system navigator. I work in a department at ROCK called ASN, which stands for Access and System Navigation. So I'll tell you a little bit about sort of what that is and then what I do as a system navigator. So ASN essentially is, I like to describe us sort of as like the intake department at ROCK, but we're more like I guess a better description would be sort of like a community-wide intake. And the reason I say that is because although we are based out of ROCK, the reason for that being because, like, as we mentioned in the beginning, ROCK is the lead agency for the child and youth mental health sector. So ASN is based out of ROCK. However, we have partnerships with other agencies in the community that we're able to refer clients into as well. So some of our agencies include Woodview, PAW, which is therapy for the deaf and hard of hearing community, in Radius Child and Youth Services. So essentially, ASN is meant to be a centralized access point for child and youth mental health services. It came out of the need that, a lot of folks were kind of maybe having difficulties understanding like how to navigate the system, going to this front door and that front door. So there were like different entrances to programs and services at different agencies, right? So it came out of that need, and it's been like such an amazing mechanism, the growth that we've seen over, the last few years of ASN. So all basically referrals to any of these agencies come through ASN, and then clients are assigned a system navigator, such as me. And so what my role as a system navigator is to support folks in navigating the mental health system. So it really is meant to sort of provide them with like a one-stop access point where they're able to share their story with their navigator. And then, once we have like a really full understanding around, what are the needs for the family and the client, and, what are their hopes and goals, what's going well, and all of those pieces, then we're able to successfully navigate them to the appropriate services that are, aligned with their needs. The biggest thing I think that's come out of that is, providing, again, equitable access to everybody in the community. So, it's not confusing for folks. Again, they know that this is sort of the main access point, and, their needs are kind of assessed equitably. And then we're following kind of that, streamlined process of connecting them to a program or a service that is aligned with their needs. And we're really doing it in a very collaborative way to understand, incorporating their voice, the client's voice and the family's voice, and ensuring that we are taking that into consideration when we are connecting them to the programs and services that not only they need, but they want.
Wonderful. So our next question is, what made you want to get involved with ROCK and the kind of work that this organization does?
Yeah, so, I think my own lived experience for sure was a huge contributor for me getting into this line of work. I think as a society, like everyone is touched by mental health in some way, whether that's, directly through their own lived experiences or through somebody that they know. And for me, it was definitely a little bit of both growing up. So I actually came to Canada at a really young age as a refugee immigrant with my family. And so that experience alone kind of brings, a lot of its own challenges. The biggest being, having to like learn and adapt to like an entirely different culture than and society than what, I grew up with, in my own experiences in my family home. I grew up with that feeling of not quite feeling like I fit in within my own cultural identity, but also not really, feeling like I fit into the larger society that I was living in. And so that was like a big contributor, but I also had close family members as well, who had pretty significant mental health challenges, and just growing up, around that was also a big driving force. I think I've always, in general, I've been the type of person who, even when I was younger, who was very driven by the idea of like justice and fairness. And as I got older, that coupled with sort of my own, lived experiences as someone with a bicultural identity, I was able to find a vehicle for that and hone it sort of into a passion for things like social justice and equity. So getting into this line of work has allowed me to, use that drive and that passion to help people who might be growing up in similar circumstances. So, I think of it sort of as like my life purpose, to be honest. Like, I think, for a long time, I felt like, my identity was something that, maybe I had to hide or be ashamed of. And so now, being in this line of work, I, really believe that a lot of my own experiences growing up and a lot of the things that I went through as a young person, I went through so that I could, use that lived experience to help others who might be, going through similar circumstances or life experiences themselves.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing part of the puzzle pieces of who makes you who you are and sharing your a lot of passion for what you do. And that leads us right into our next question. What is one of the most rewarding things you have seen throughout your career with ROCK?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I think I see like little rewarding things every day, to be honest, in my conversations with families. If I were to, there's so many, but if I were to pick one, I think just seeing the connections that kiddos have made in some of our group services. So I can think of like a specific example that like just immediately came to my head when you asked that. It was two young girls who were in a program for like one of the programs that I mentioned earlier around like self-esteem building and social skills building and that kind of thing. And one of the kiddos was just talking about how she has ADHD and kind of, some of the feelings that she was having around that, which, maybe weren't so positive. And like, without me even having to step in or say anything, one of the girls in the group kind of stepped up and said, I have ADHD too. And I actually think that there's a lot of great things that come along with that. And it makes you more creative and it makes you more outgoing. And she listed off like a whole list of things that she thought were really great about having ADHD. And that to me is like something that, just sticks, right? So seeing, the conversations that we have now around mental health that maybe that I didn't, see growing up. Being able to normalize it. And then also just the little like daily, rewarding successes. Like, we have clients who maybe come to us with, some big needs, and then, we connect them to a service, and then maybe we cross paths with them again at another point. And then you hear about, all these great gains that they've made and all of, the successes and how grateful people are for the support that they've received. And so just those pieces, right? I think every day kind of knowing that you're going into work and you're helping people, you're kind of their safe space and they're creating that space for them to talk about, the things that maybe they aren't able to talk about in, other parts of their lives. I think for me, even just being in my position now as a system navigator, what I'm, most passionate about and what I think I find the most rewarding is when folks come to us like in those like, pre-contemplative stages of exploring this idea of mental health, right? So for some people, it's totally new, right? Like maybe they've never had a therapy session before. And so for me, I get to be sort of that, the first voice that they hear on the other end of the line, or the first face that they see, if this is sort of like their first appointment that they've had with somebody who's going to hear their story, right? And so sometimes, I can think of a couple of situations where maybe I've had some youth who've been like hesitant, like maybe that this is something that their parents have set up for them, or they've just never talked to somebody about, a stranger who's not in their family about some of these things that they're going through. And so supporting them through that, and just creating that space where they feel like comfortable and safe enough to talk about maybe some of the things that they're going through. And that's happened a couple of times where I've been able to, turn it around, maybe they were coming in feeling pretty hesitant or not wanting to accept a service that maybe their parent is hoping they'll get involved in. And then I'm able to have those, supportive conversations with them and maybe turn it around and be able to successfully connect them to a service. And that feels fantastic, right? Because, it's that first step in the right direction. And it's maybe like a little step, but, crossing that first little step is, it's huge for some folks. It's sort of like a turning point, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear that there have been so many rewarding moments in your career. And it's wonderful that you did mention sort of how the conversation has changed since like when you were younger versus now, because it actually leads into our next question. What was the conversation around mental health like when you were growing up, and how has it changed?
Yeah. So, truthfully, I think for me, that's sort of like, it's a bit of a layered, like nuanced question for sure. Cause I think, again, I come with my own life experiences, right? But, and that's layered with some of like the cultural stuff that I talked about. But, outside of that, like in general, growing up in school, I don't think, for me, there were a ton of conversations surrounding mental health. I specifically remember a time, where, I was having a bad day and I wanted to talk to someone about it. And I tried going to my guidance counselor because we didn't have social workers or counselors at our schools back in the day. I'm aging myself, but yeah. So, I mean, if we did, I certainly didn't know about them. So, even if we did, obviously they weren't advertising them very well, but so the conversations it shows that the conversations weren't really there. But yeah, I went in and tried talking to my guidance counselor, and I think I tried telling her, subtly that I was struggling, because that can be hard too, to go to somebody who you don't know very well, right? And open up about that. And I think you could feel the discomfort in the room. And she sort of shifted the conversation to be more about like class subjects. And then we started like picking courses. And so that's what my sort of view of, guidance counselors, in those days were more that, that's what they were there for, to help with. That was sort of the message that I got, right? Like to help with picking classes and course loads and that kind of thing. I do remember seeing a lot of my classmates sort of struggling silently. And I think there was a lot of stigma and not much awareness. It felt like it was sort of this thing that existed, but no one really talked about. And then, for me, again, personally, there was sort of the added, cultural layers. So, mental health just wasn't something we really talked about. And it sort of felt like things were kind of either swept under the rug, or the focus was more on like the behaviors, right? So rather than kind of understanding the root. And so I think like now, I think the second part of that question was, how has it changed? And I think it's so, encouraging to see how much awareness there is now and how much it has changed, especially as a parent. So I do have two young kids, a 10-year-old and a 4-year-old. And, my 10-year-old daughter comes home talking about all of the really great things that she's learning, topics related to mental health. Now in school as part of like her daily curriculum, right? So, her teacher incorporates things like mindfulness time every day. That's a part of their, daily routine. Sometimes she plays like guided visualizations for them, or meditations. And sometimes that's just their time to, be mindful. And that can look like sitting in, they have like a little mindful corner where they get to sit and read, or just kind of meditate on their own, or just have some quiet time. They have child and youth counselors who go into the class and run like class-wide presentations about things like empathy and perspective taking and friendships. And so we're really like setting the stage for our future generation, I feel like, and really, giving them the skills to hopefully succeed, like setting them up for success. Even the language that we use has really changed, I think, right? People are much more mindful around language. And yeah, I think it's like super encouraging to see how much that's shifted. And especially being in this field and being in the system, seeing all of the changes is fantastic.
Yeah, I've heard from like other people how like much the conversation has changed, like from when they were kids versus now. But what do you think like about like despite the progress that we've made in regards to mental health, like what are some of the biggest issues that you see youth facing right now?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, one of the biggest things like that's certainly also very different than how I grew up is social media, right? Um, I think social media has definitely helped in a lot of ways, in terms of, raising awareness and giving us access to information that maybe we didn't have access to before. Sometimes for some people, maybe the conversation is starting there, right? Like they're learning little bits about mental health through social media. But I think there's also, such an overload of information that we have access to through social media that it can also sometimes be confusing if we're not having, open conversations and dialogue about it. I think, that could, because really like with social media, you're seeing the best parts of people's lives, right? So there's this constant sort of like comparison, I think, for a lot of people with what they see. And that could be a contributor to things that we're seeing, right? Like whether it's self-esteem challenges or body image challenges, or and so I think it's really important that, because it can be a good tool in some ways. I think it's really important to have really open dialogue and more conversations around, what we're seeing on social media with youth, and just really encouraging them to maybe be more like critical of what they're seeing, and just having that education and understanding around what they have access to through social media. And then I think too, like a really big thing that a lot of us are dealing with, sort of like the after effects of, is the pandemic, right? All of the aftermath of that. And we're really seeing it, in terms of like youth experiencing maybe like a lot of social isolation, finding it hard to, get back into regular routines that they had pre-pandemic, whether that's going to school or extracurricular activities, or even just, being social. And so I think those are some of probably like the bigger challenges that we're seeing for youth.
Thank you for saying, you mentioned a lot of challenges that I think sometimes people don't even realize in their everyday routines. So I think it was really important and cool that you got to highlight on quite a few of them. So the next question and comment that we wanted to make is that DTBY is built upon creating a community that is grounded in unity. What are some of the ways we can strive towards supporting our mental health in our community?
So I think, normalizing the conversation about mental health. I would tell parents, like, don't be afraid to talk about it, because I think sometimes there's this fear that if I talk about it, I might put the thought there. And I would challenge that, because I think creating that space to educate and talk about it with really open dialogue in a really like genuine and authentic way, that can invite vulnerability for people, and safety, and okay, like this is okay to talk about, and just encourages them to be more open, so that when they are struggling, they know that they can come forward instead of struggling silently, because that's a big factor, right, that drives mental health challenges, is like sitting in it alone. It can feel very isolating. So I think connection is so important. And I think like we can do that through opportunities like this, right? Like what you guys are doing, I think is fantastic. It's I think that's a big factor, is creating community, helping youth understand like how to build community and giving them opportunities to be a part of community, and engaging them in ways that can like support that process, and like listening to them, I think, right? Like it's so simple, but it's so important because, you know, they know what they need, right? They know what will help. So, you know, it's really important. Like, and that's something that ROCK honestly is like, it's a really core focus at ROCK, in terms of client and family voice, like incorporating that, because we really do embed it in a lot of our processes, like even, you know, sending out surveys after, you know, any program or even appointment, to understand and get feedback on how, you know, we can better support them. And it's really important to, I think, factor in youth voice, and just listen to them and what, you know, what they think they need, and creating opportunities for them to have that platform to talk about what it is that they need and what they think will kind of help. Because, you know, it might be corny, but, you know, youth are the future, right? Like we're supporting them to become future adults in society, right? And I think that's where the change happens, is, you know, at kind of bottom up, right? And it's, I think, creating opportunities for adults to be allies to youth, and provide like mentorship opportunities, all of those really great kind of spaces to listen to them and give them opportunities to help guide us, right? Because we're all, I think, figuring it out together.
I really liked your whole answer to that question and how you really incorporated the opportunities, how we need to support youth through the opportunities that we present to them, which leads right into the next question. Are there opportunities for youth to get involved with ROCK specifically?
Yes, there are many opportunities. I'm very excited to tell you about all the opportunities we have. So a lot of them are, so, you know, in the beginning, I talked about all the different sorts of programs and services that we offer. So I like to describe it almost as like buckets of services. So we have sort of our like community-based and like prevention services. And then we have more of our like clinical services, right? Those are like more of like our therapy type services. So most of our opportunities fall within that bucket of what we call like prevention and community-based programs. One of them being through the New Mentality. So the New Mentality is a youth engagement initiative that does exactly that, right? Like engages youth in conversations around mental health. So the New Mentality is actually a province-wide initiative. So there are sort of subcommittees all over the province. One of those subcommittees being in Halton. ROCK is a partner with the New Mentality. So we are a sort of like a host agency or host site for the Halton-based New Mentality Committee. So this is a committee made up of all youth. It is completely youth-led, but they do have the support of an adult ally who is able to kind of, you know, help lead, you know, or not lead, co-lead, let's say, and help sort of with some of the logistical aspects of, you know, what the committee comes with. So essentially what they do is, as a committee, they decide what they want to do, really, but the objective and the goal is to increase awareness around mental health and help reduce the stigma. And so they take on sort of like an annual project that could look like a podcast. It could look like, you know, they did a magazine one year. They did, I think just this year, they did a sort of like a slideshow presentation that is focused on, again, raising awareness and reducing the stigma around mental health. So They are just now wrapping up their 2022-2023 year. Sort of in June is when they'll be wrapping up. And then there will be recruitment done over the summer in preparation for the next year. So that would be like the 2023-2024 year starting in the fall. So they're not currently open for applications, but they will be over the summer. And there is a volunteer portal on our website. So I can, the website is rockonline.ca. And there's a volunteer portal with an application that you can fill out to apply and be a part of that committee. And then there is also, they will be offering, ROCK will be offering over the summer a leaders in training program. This is going to be like a 2-day program where youth ages 13 to 16 have the opportunity to complete a training. And this allows them to learn different tools and leadership skills, and then use that experience to actually support facilitation of our summer camp offerings alongside ROCK staff. So that's another opportunity I think that actually, you know, youth can apply to now via, again, our volunteer portal on the website there. So those fall into our prevention kind of bucket of services. And then we also have through, again, our prevention services, a wide variety of programs and services that support the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. So there are some opportunities through that sector. And the nice thing about that is for youth who are really passionate about supporting that population and that community, or maybe identify within that community, it's a nice way for them to get involved and get some experience under their belt. So that could include, again, that LIT program. They also, I believe, take on placement students as well. So there are some like student practicum and placement opportunities. If you remember, I mentioned at the beginning, that's sort of how I actually started my journey at ROCK as a placement student. So it's a wonderful opportunity to get that experience under your belt. And then they also have what they call YAC committee. So that's the Youth Action Committee, specific to the 2S LGBTQ+A community. So the LIT training program is actually a prerequisite for being involved in the Youth Action Committee. And they provide similar skills. So again, like leadership skills, and but they do that specifically through a queer lens. So they get a lot of information around safety and navigating things like queerness and transphobia and homophobia, and how to support peers. And then they get an introduction into sort of what that Youth Action Committee looks like, and are able to apply to be a part of that committee as well. So that's something I think that we'd be looking at for the fall of 2023, specifically for the Youth Action Committee. And then finally, I think I also mentioned our ROCK Hub locations. So these are specific locations that we have in Burlington, 2 of them to be exact. One is sort of like in the Burloak area, and then there's another one that we have sort of in the Warwick, Surrey area. And they offer, we have like the, I think I mentioned like the fresh food box program. They have like pantries, so access to food. They also have a clothing room and infant supplies, so things like formula and diapers and all of those great things. So they actually do take on volunteers at the ROCK Hub locations to help in those with those programs specifically. So they would, you know, mostly be responsible for sort of, you know, organizing and helping in handing out supplies to the community that comes in for those things. And then they have some actual kids programs. So they have some kids programs for ages 5 to 10. These look like usually like group programs. And they have youth programs for ages 11 to 17. And then they have a breakfast club that runs Friday mornings for all ages. So these are also opportunities where folks can volunteer to help out in those areas. And again, similarly, all of our volunteer opportunities are posted on our website. So if you go to rockonline.ca, you'll see that there's a volunteer portal with volunteer opportunities and an application that you can fill out if you want to get involved.
Wow, that's so wonderful to hear that there are so many opportunities for youth who are looking to get involved in the community and who might be interested in this kind of line of work. Which again leads into our next question, which is, what advice do you have for young people who are looking to get involved in this line of work?
Yeah, that is a great segue, because that was sort of, I was about to get into it and I'm like, oh, wait, because I think this might be touched on next, because yes, like that is honestly my first piece of advice. I kind of alluded to that a little bit when I talked about my own experiences of how I got into the field, right? Is starting out as a placement student at ROCK. That is sort of like the more tangible advice that I would give, is to get involved in your community, whether that's through volunteering or maybe considering doing like a co-op placement, or even before, like thinking about, post-secondary. So for high school students, that could look like doing a co-op placement even in high school. It's so important for, so many reasons beyond just the fact that it helps build up your experience. But really important is that it allows you to, again, kind of test the waters and see what direction you want to go in, even within the field, because even within the field, it is so diverse. The helping profession in general is so broad, with so many different opportunities in terms of like settings that you want to work in, or even with like different populations that you want to work with. Because again, as we know, everybody is affected by mental health, right? So you can work in hospital settings, you can work in nonprofit mental health agencies like ROCK, you can even work in schools, again, working with different populations. So that could look like, you might find through volunteering that you're more passionate about supporting maybe newcomers, or maybe your, area of interest lies more specifically with general mental health or even addictions, or it helps you kind of figure out, do I want to work with little kids, or do I want to work with teenagers? Do I want to work with adults? There's so much that you can do within the field. So it's a really practical way to figure that out before you get to post-secondary. And, again, build up your experience, right? And I think, another piece of advice that I would give is that I think so many people who get into this line of work do that because they're sort of like the helpers of the world, right? I think they're the type of people, like what we think of, right? Is that I often hear from, youth who are interested in getting into this line of work, that they might be the friend that everybody comes to for advice, and that they really like that about themselves, right? They like helping. They're people that, maybe give so much of themselves, and, are willing to help whoever needs it, and help out in any way to whoever needs it, which I think is great. Again, I see those people as sort of like being the change makers of the world. And they come into this line of work feeling so inspired and trying to help all the people and do all the things. And I also think that is why it's so important to learn about, your own boundaries and self-care early on. Because if this is the type of work you see yourself doing throughout your life, as we all know, I'm sure you've all heard, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So you got to pace yourself and you got to fill your own cup. And I think that's something that I've had to learn even as an adult and throughout my career, is that, you can actually be more loving and more caring and do more for others when you love and care for yourself first, because it gives you more capacity to be able to do that, and to be able to help other people.
Oh, wow, that's wonderful that you mentioned that. Yes, I do think that's true. Yeah. Like self-care is truly so important, and it's wonderful that there's so much awareness around it now. Like,
Yes.
like you see people promoting it everywhere, which is wonderful. Anyways,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. So that concludes this episode of DTBY's community podcast. On behalf of the CYC and DTBY, Cassie and I would like to thank you for this amazing learning opportunity. The ROCK does very important work in our community, and their contributions to mental health should not go unnoticed. Head on over to Reach Out Center for Kids website to learn more about ROCK, their services, and how you can contribute to this movement. Once again, thank you for joining us today, Fayrouz, and thank you everyone who made this episode possible. Tune in next month for another episode.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.